The Book of Daniel. Daniel's life and ministry bridged the entire 70-year period of Babylonian captivity. Deported to Babylon at the age of 16 and handpicked for government service, Daniel becomes God's prophetic mouthpiece to the Gentile and Jewish world, declaring God's present and eternal purpose. 9 of the 12 chapters in his book revolve around dreams, including God-given visions involving trees, animals, beasts, and images. In both his personal adventures and prophetic visions, Daniel shows God's guidance, intervention, and power in the affairs of men. The name Daniel, or Daniel, means God is my judge, and the book is, of course, named after the author and principal character. The Greek form Daniel in the Septuagint is the basis for the Latin and English titles. The author of Daniel. Daniel and his 3 friends were evidently born into noble Judean families and were, quote-unquote, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand. End quote. Chapter 1, verse 4. He was given 3 years of training in the best of Babylon schools. Verse 5. As part of the re-identification process, he was given a new name that honored one of the Babylonian deities. Belteshazzar meant, Bel protect his life. See chapter 1, verse 7, chapter 4, verse 8, Jeremiah 51:44. Daniel's wisdom and divinely given interpretive abilities brought him into a position of prominence, especially in the courts of Nebuchadnezzar and Darius. He is one of the few well-known Bible characters about whom nothing negative is ever written. His life was characterized by faith, prayer, courage, consistency, and lack of compromise. This quote-unquote greatly beloved man was mentioned 3 times in his 6th century BC contemporary Ezekiel as an example of righteousness. Chapter 9, verse 23, chapter 10, verse 11 and 19. Daniel claimed to write this book, chapter 12, verse 4, and he used the autobiographical first person from chapter 7, verse 2 onward. The Jewish Talmud agrees with this testimony, and Christ attributed a quote from chapter 9, verse 27 to Daniel the prophet, Matthew 24:15. The time of Daniel. Babylon rebelled against the Assyrian Empire in 626 BC and overthrew the Assyrian capital of Nineveh in 612 BC. Babylon became the master of the Middle East when it defeated the Egyptian armies in 605 BC. Daniel was among those taken captive to Babylon that year when Nebuchadnezzar subdued Jerusalem. He ministered for the full duration of the Babylonian captivity as a prophet and a government official, and continued on after Babylon was overcome by the Medes and Persians in 539 BC. His prophetic ministry was directed to the Gentile courts of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, and Persia, Darius and Cyrus, as well as to his Jewish countrymen. Zerubbabel led a return of the Jews to Jerusalem in the 1st year of Cyrus, and Daniel lived and ministered at least until the 3rd year of Cyrus, 536 BC, chapter 10, verse 1. Daniel's book was no doubt written in Cyrus's 9th year, circa 530 BC. As he predicted, the Persian Empire continued until Alexander the Great, who extended the boundaries of the Greek Empire as far east as India, chapter 11, verse 2 and 3. The Romans later displaced the Greeks as rulers of the Middle East. For various reasons, many critics have argued that Daniel is a fraudulent book that was written in the time of the Maccabees in the 2nd century BC, not the 6th century BC as it claims, but their arguments are not compelling. 1. The prophetic argument holds that Daniel could not have made such accurate predictions. It must be a quote-unquote prophecy after the events. Daniel 11 alone contains over 100 specific prophecies of historical events that literally came true. The author, the critics say, must have lived at the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, and probably wrote this to strengthen the faith of the Jews, 175 to 163 BC. But this argument was developed out of a theological bias that assumes true prophecy cannot take place. It also implies that the work was intentionally deceptive. 2. The linguistic argument claims that the book uses a late Aramaic in chapter 2 through 7, and that the Persian and Greek words also point to a late date. but recent discoveries show that Daniel's Aramaic is actually a form of the early Imperial Aramaic. Daniel's use of some Persian words is no argument for a late date, since he continued living in the Persian period under Cyrus. The only Greek words are names of musical instruments in chapter 3. And this comes as no surprise, since there were Greek mercenaries in the Assyrian and Babylonian armies. Far more Greek words would be expected if the book were written in the 2nd century BC. 3. The historical argument asserts that Daniel's historical blunders argue for a late date, but recent evidence has demonstrated the historical accuracy of Daniel. Inscriptions found at Haran show that Belshazzar reigned in Babylon while his father Nabonidus was fighting the invading Persians, and Darius the Mede, chapter 5, verse 31, chapter 6, verse 1, has been identified as Gubaru, a governor appointed by Cyrus. The Christ of Daniel. Christ is the great stone who will crush the kingdoms of this world. Chapter 2, verse 34, 35, and 44. The Son of Man who is given dominion by the Ancient of Days. Chapter 7, verse 13 and 14. And the coming Messiah who will be cut off. Chapter 9, verse 25 and 26. It is likely that Daniel's vision in chapter 10, verse 5 through 9 was an appearance of Christ. Revelation 1, 12 through 16. The vision of the 69 weeks in chapter 9, verse 25 and 26 pinpoints the coming of the Messiah. The decree of chapter 9, verse 25 takes place on March 4th, 444 BC, Nehemiah 2, 1 through 8. The 69 weeks of 7 years equals 483 years, or 173,880 days, using 360-day prophetic years. This leads to March 29th, AD 33, the date of the triumphal entry. This is checked by noting that 444 BC to AD 33 is 476 years, and 476 times 365.24219 days per year equals 173,855 days. Adding 25 days for the difference between March 4th and March 29 gives 173,880 days. Keys to Daniel. Keyword: God's program for Israel. Daniel was written to encourage the exiled Jews by revealing God's sovereign program for Israel during and after the period of Gentile domination. The quote-unquote times of the Gentiles began with the Babylonian captivity, and Israel would suffer under Gentile powers for many years. But this period is not permanent, and a time will come when God will establish the Messianic kingdom, which will last forever. Daniel repeatedly emphasizes the sovereignty and power of God over human affairs. Quote, "The Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and gives it to whomever he chooses." End quote. Chapter 4, verse 25. The God who directs the forces of history has not deserted his people. They must continue to trust in him, because his promises of preservation and ultimate restoration are as sure as the coming of the Messiah. Key verses: Daniel 2, 20 through 22, and Daniel 2:24. Quote, "Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him." End quote. Chapter 2, verse 20 through 22. Quote, "And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." End quote. Chapter 2, verse 44. Key chapter: Daniel 9. Daniel's prophecy of the 70 weeks, chapter 9, verse 24 through 27, provides the chronological frame for a messianic prediction from the time of Daniel to the establishment of the kingdom on earth. It is clear that the first 69 weeks are fulfilled at Christ's first coming. Some scholars affirm that the last week has not yet been fulfilled because Christ relates its main events to his second coming. Matthew 24, 6 and 15. Others perceive these words of Christ as applying to the Roman desecration of the temple in AD 70. Survey of Daniel. Daniel, the Apocalypse of the Old Testament, presents a surprisingly detailed and comprehensive sweep of prophetic history. After an introductory chapter in Hebrew, Daniel switches to Aramaic in chapters 2 through 7 to describe the future course of the Gentile world powers. Then, in chapter 8 through 12, Daniel reverts back to his native language to survey the future of the Jewish nation under Gentile domination. The theme of God's sovereign control in the affairs of the world history clearly emerges and provides comfort to the future church, as well as to the Jews whose nation was destroyed by the Babylonians. The Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans will come and go, but God will establish his kingdom through his redeemed people forever. Daniel's three divisions are the personal history of Daniel. 1. The prophetic plan for the Gentiles, chapters 2 through 7, and the prophetic plan for Israel, chapters 8 through 12. The personal history of Daniel. 1. This chapter introduces the book by giving the background and preparation of the prophet. Daniel is deported along with other promising youths and placed in an intensive training program in Nebuchadnezzar's court. Their names and diets are changed so that they will lose their Jewish identification, but Daniel's resolve to remain faithful to the Lord is rewarded. He and his friends are granted wisdom and knowledge. The prophetic plan for the Gentiles, chapter 2 through 7. Only Daniel can relate and interpret Nebuchadnezzar's disturbing dream of the great statue. 2. God empowers Daniel to foretell the way in which he, God, will sovereignly raise and depose 4 Gentile empires. The Messiah's kingdom will end the times of the Gentiles. Because of his position revealed in the dream, Nebuchadnezzar erects a golden image and demands that all bow to it. 3. The persecution and preservation of Daniel's friends in the fiery furnace again illustrate the power of God. After Nebuchadnezzar refuses to respond to the warning of his vision of the tree, chapter 4, he is humbled until he acknowledges the supremacy of God and the foolishness of his pride. The feast of Belshazzar marks the end of the Babylonian kingdom, chapter 5. Belshazzar is judged because of his emergent defiance of God. In the reign of Darius, a plot against Daniel backfires when he is divinely delivered in the den of lions, chapter 6. Daniel's courageous faith is rewarded, and Darius learns a lesson about the might of God of Israel. The vision of the 4 beasts, 7, supplements the 4-part statue vision of chapter 2 in its portrayal of the Babylonian, Persian, Greek, and Roman empires. But once again, quote, the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, end quote, chapter 7, verse 18. The prophetic plan for Israel, chapter 8 through 12. The focus in chapter 8 narrows to a vision of the ram and goat that shows Israel under the Medo-Persian and Grecian empires. Alexander the Great is the large horn of chapter 8, verse 21, and Antiochus Epiphanes is the little horn of chapter 8, verse 9. After Daniel's prayer of confession for his people, he is privileged to receive the revelation of the 70 weeks, including the Messiah's atoning death, chapter 9. This gives the chronology of God's perfect plan for the redemption and deliverance of his people. Following is a great vision that gives amazing details of Israel's future history, 10 and 11. Chapter 11 chronicles the coming kings of Persia and Greece, the wars between the Ptolemies and Egypt, and the Seleucids of Syria, and the persecution led by Antiochus. God's people will be saved out of tribulation and resurrected, chapter 12.